yesterday, you had a commercial airliner that was traveling from Iran on its way to Beirut, and a couple of military jets just come out of nowhere and harass the plane and force it to lower altitude. People on board were injured, and initial reports from Iranian media said that it was an Israeli jet, but then later turned out to be American jets. Because the two are so different, right? So take a look at this, okay? This is the headline from the Jerusalem Post. They said, unraveling the mystery of the United States F-15s intercepting Iran's Mahan Air. It's not really a mystery, though, is it? I mean, we kind of know what happened, but they like to make it seem as though it's complicated. So I want to show you the video that came out of this event, because this was the only thing we had to go off of at the beginning, okay? So this was filmed on board the flight. Take a look. I mean, absolutely chaotic, okay? Absolutely chaotic. And some pictures over here. People on board were also injured. I don't know how badly. You had differing reports. Some people needed operations. Other outlets are saying that there was no grave injuries. I mean, nonetheless, this is not okay. That's not the point. They're saying that the warplane was an American F-15 conducting a visual surveillance of the flight, and that Mahan Air was flying close to a U.S. base called the al-tanf Garrison that is in Syria near the Jordanian border. The airline had flown this route before, and the pilots did not expect to have to take any evasive maneuvers. Okay, several problems with this paragraph. Do you see how things are framed? Do you see the framing here? First of all, this phrase of conducting a visual surveillance, that's a very weird way to phrase harassment. What does that mean, conducting a visual surveillance? I mean, do you accept if Syrian jets come into the United States and conduct visual surveillances of commercial airliners? Do you think anyone would accept that? Be honest. Be honest. That's an act of war. You would declare war if someone else flew into your airspace with a commercial airliner, never mind a military jet. So, a drone shooting down a U.S. drone inside Iranian airspace was seen as an act of war by the U.S. So never mind if you actually brought military jets into their airspace, right? And then look at this. They say here, like, Mahan Air was flying close to a U.S. base called the al-tanf Garrison, as if they committed some kind of crime. Like, they asked for it, they flew close to this U.S. base, but they don't actually mention that the U.S. base is there illegally. It's a colonization. What is this U.S. base doing there in the first place? Who allowed the United States to put a military garrison in Syria in the first place? Mahan Air has permission from the Syrian government to use Syrian airspace. They don't need fucking permission from the U.S. or from this garrison. So this garrison, al-tanf Air Base, we talked about this a few days ago. This is where it is. You can see here, it's actually not too far from Damascus, right? And that is where you have a large U.S. garrison. Can you imagine if Syria came and put a military base 2-3 hours away from Washington, D.C.? Can you imagine that? Would you accept that? Is that okay to you? Why is this okay? Who said this is okay? Once again, there's two sets of rules for white Western powers and another for, countries in the global South. And, something that I want to point out is that this is considered to be Syrian so-called opposition territory, right? The Free Syrian Army. And I think it really tells you everything when the so-called Free Syrian Army allow the United States to come and put a military base inside the territory that they control. Tells you everything you need to know about their motives, who's backing them, and what their intentions are, and what their kind of governing would look like. It would be a U.S. puppet regime with U.S. military bases. And the irony that their flag is a French colonial flag from when Syria used to be a French mandate. I mean, not much of a liberation, is it? So, going back to this article over here, regional media such as El Mayadeen reported that Israeli jets had threatened the civilian airliner, and others spread rumors online that Israeli F-15s had used the civilian airliner as cover, claiming Israel had used this maneuver before over Syria. So, once again, instead of actually pointing out how messed up this whole incident is, they're trying to make it about how Israel was unfairly accused of being involved. Like, as if it's so difficult, it's so out of character for them to violate Syrian airspace. Dude, both the US and Israel have F-15s. Both the US and Israel violate Syrian airspace on a daily basis, not sometimes, daily, okay? Israel has done hundreds of airstrikes inside Syria. They have no right to do that. US has an Air Force base inside of Syria. Has no right to do that. So, forgive people if they easily confuse the two. It's, not exactly too hard to do that, is it? So, there we go. And once again, they try to push that narrative over here again. So it appears Iran's regime media and pro-regime accounts didn't know whether to blame Israel or the US for the incident. It's kind of the same thing, though, isn't it? So, I mean, this is really something messed up. And what I wrote over here, I said, I wonder how Americans would react if two Syrian jets entered United States airspace and harassed the commercial airliner. But I suppose it's easier to just ignore it because it didn't happen to Westerners, right? So you won't hear much about this in the mainstream media. Once again, not just when it comes to people's very lives and their human rights, but also when it comes to the concepts of borders, of sovereignty, of international rights. There are none for people in the global south. Right? So in the West, these international bodies who are run by the United States and used to strong arm the global south, they'll constantly speak about human rights and the need to cooperate and use diplomacy and how cooperation between nation states is so important, and they always want to avert war, and yet they constantly violate countries' sovereignty, other countries' sovereignties, and their borders and their airspace and international law, as long as it suits their agenda. There's a double standard always regarding everything. There's one set of rules for Western powers and another set of rules for countries in the global south. Of course, right? It's just like the two-tier, I mean, it's more than two-tier. I'd say it's a 3-tier, 4-tier justice system that you have inside the U.S., right? You have one for the elites, and then you have another for whites, and then you have another one for people of color and African Americans. It's always a double, triple standard. It's never democracy and respect for international law and sovereignty. No. Different set of rules for the global south. Of course. If Syrian jets had done that, if they had entered U.S. airspace, the United States would have declared war. Of course. If Iran would park their navy off of the coast of California or Florida, the U.S. would declare war. If Iran flew a drone inside of U.S. airspace or Israeli airspace, they would declare war. But it's okay for them to do it to other countries, right? And the issue here about whether this is they were conducting visual surveillance is irrelevant. They have no right to be there in the first place. I don't care if they're conducting visual surveillance on a balloon. You're not allowed in. Zero right whatsoever. None. It doesn't matter if it was a commercial airliner. It doesn't matter if it was a military jet. It's not your airspace. But you know, they don't make any mention of sovereignty. They don't make any mention that this was a violation of international law. They don't make any mention that the fact this base even exists inside Syria's borders is a violation of international law, is a declaration of war. There's no mention of that whatsoever. And then these news outlets, these mainstream media outlets pretend to be objective. They're completely, explicitly biased and complete, absolute hypocrites. They don't give a rat's ass about human rights or international law or sovereignty or borders. But, you know, they'll raise hell and they'll scream and rant and rave if you violate their so-called sovereignty and borders, right? You know, in the United States, people coming from the global south and crossing over to try and get a better life because their countries have been crippled by U.S. imperialism is so bad of a threat that they have to go and build a wall, right? Trump wants to build a wall and Obama built cages to put people in there, right? Because U.S. sovereignty must be respected, U.S. immigration laws must be respected, but it's okay for the United States to send military jets and build military bases in other countries, right? Wow. I think I covered this last week when Iran and Syria signed a new military accord for those surface-to-air missile systems. And as you correctly pointed out, just a few days ago, Iran and China also worked out a new agreement. And it definitely is. I mean, you know what? When you're going into Syrian airspace and you're harassing a commercial airliner, I mean, do you think these pilots are stupid or something? They know exactly what they're doing. What do you think? They mistook it for a hot air balloon? Once again, they have no right to be in Syrian airspace at all. But this is definitely international intimidation. And, you know, another reason they do this, they're also trying to provoke military response from Syria. I mean, Russia has delivered these S-300, S-400 surface-to-air missile systems. And they know damn well that in an all-out war, in conventional warfare, Syria is in no position to gain any kind of victory against the Zionist occupation or the U.S. So if they can, and they can try and provoke a military response to have an excuse for further military expansion, I think the fact that this is a commercial civilian airliner makes it even worse. And the fact people were injured makes it even worse. But even if those were Iranian jets, even if those were Syrian jets, there's still no right for the United States or any other country to violate the airspace of the Syrian Arab Republic and do anything. I don't care if they're going for a stroll. You see, this is another form, again, of not just hypocrisy, but also this white supremacy that, you know, they take it upon themselves, the Western powers take it upon themselves to trample on the rights, on the right to self-determination, self-governance, sovereignty of countries in the global south. That they think they have the permission to just do whatever they want, walk in like they own the place. This hasn't stopped. You know, they tell you that colonialism has stopped. No, it hasn't. Here's the proof. This is just one tiny example. It hasn't stopped. This is no different from crusaders coming in 1,000 years ago. It's the same goddamn scheme. It's the same power dynamic. It's the same kind of politics and oppression and aggression. It hasn't changed. It's no different. It's just the flags that change.